I'll just pose the question. You can start about that. So let's start with the withdrawal first, because with the timeline and withdrawal starting, it is like even like much faster than is expected, and already we are facing a lot of security concerns in Afghanistan. What's your thoughts about the withdrawal, full withdrawal of U.S. forces and NATO forces, and the risk posing like for Afghan people and Afghan government?
Yeah, I think it's a relatively complex answer because what you're looking at is after 20 years, you're just now getting to a point where you're achieving certain things, and there's a fairly broad belief that we've done everything that we can do in Afghanistan in terms of helping establish the institutions of government, the security institutions, and that they've reached a sufficiently mature stage where we can separate, we can move on. The challenge doesn't come from are they strong enough to stand on their own, but are they strong enough to stand on their own in the face of adversity, which obviously is represented by the Taliban at this point. Will they survive that? And that the accelerated withdrawal timeline makes people nervous, understandably, especially the people of Afghanistan, I believe. How much confidence do we have in those institutions that we've spent 20 years developing? Will they be able to withstand that pressure? And the narrative that you see today is, I think I saw over the weekend, something like 22 districts have fallen in the last weeks to the Taliban, and that makes people nervous. That raises that level of anxiety that maybe we shouldn't withdraw, but to stay means you really need to revisit the strategy and what's possible within a timeline. And I don't think we've done as good a job at that as we could have over the past 20 years.
So what's your thoughts about President Ghani's proposed visit to Washington and meeting with Biden? Do you think it may change any kind of, strategy or policy for Afghanistan, with the fact that there is a lot of security concerns inside Afghanistan with the Taliban advancing with some of the cities?
That's a great question. I don't think it's going to change anything. I believe it's a meeting really intended to calm the Afghan people and the president of Afghanistan, let them know that, yeah, we're going to be there, but I don't know how sincere that effort is. If I'm President Ghani, I would definitely want to go into that meeting and say, I need assurances, concrete assurances that you're going to be there if we need you, and that you're going to have we're going to have the support that we need going forward, even if it's from more regionally focused. But the real concrete assurances that if the Taliban continue on the track that they are, that they'll have the president of Afghanistan and the people of Afghanistan will have the support that they need to ensure that we don't see pre-2001 Afghanistan again. I think that's a fear that we all have.
There are a lot of concerns by experts. They're saying that Afghanistan is facing the Saigon moment when the Vietnam War ended, and now they're thinking Taliban will take over or something, expecting with US troops and NATO troops leave. How likely is it possible for Afghanistan? Also, you have experience from Iraq War.
Yeah, that's a hard one to answer. I think given there are parallels there. The Taliban, if nothing else, they have proven to be very consistent, regardless of what they say. They have been very consistent in their actions. And I think the thing that caught my eye most of recent times was when we were talking about the special immigrant visa process and the movement of people who had Afghans who had worked for the coalition, moving them to America under that process. And the Taliban saying, oh, it's going to be fine. As long as you renounce your war crimes against Islam, everything will be fine. Well, they say that, but I think we all know what will happen to those people. And this is actually something that's a very deep concern for me. I think we're talking about 18,000 people, a rough neighborhood, and that process to obtain the special immigrant visas is now the focus of a couple of U.S. senators. One of them is Joni Ernst. And I had a conversation with a legislative liaison just yesterday about this, where he said, hey, Congress is working on this. And my response was, that's great, but we've been working on this since 2008, and no one has been able to fix this process. It is deeply bureaucratic. It's deeply flawed. It's time consuming, and it fails more people than it helps. And it, you're really late in the game when you look at the timeline for withdrawal and the timeline that it takes to work through the special immigrant visa process. You're talking just a handful of months, and no special immigrant visa will ever be processed in the next 3 months, not if it starts today. So what are you going to do with those 18,000 people? Are we going to do what we did at the end of the Vietnam War, which was take people and move them to Guam as sort of a staging base until we can process those things? Those are questions that need to be answered. Because I think we both know full well that once the last of the coalition forces are gone, the Taliban's they're gonna declare war on anybody who worked for that coalition, and regardless of what they say, they're gonna come for them, and they already are, I think, in many respects. That goes back to your question about what you hope that we would hope that Ghani gets out of his meeting with Biden. Assurances that we want these people taken care of. We don't want to lose the talent out of Afghanistan necessarily, but how do you protect those people? What assurances are there that those people will be protected, that they won't just be left to fend for their own lives after we're gone? That's a frightening thought.
You're an expert in the war, and you handed some of these bases to Afghan forces, but still it seems that Afghan forces failing with the weapons and the training they have. Somehow in the Taliban, with the propaganda, they are advancing in parts of Afghanistan. How do you see the capabilities of Afghan forces fighting back the Taliban?
The Afghans that I've met, that I've worked with over the years, are tremendous. And I think there's an incredible capability there. But this becomes a capability and capacity argument. I think you have forces, the ones that have grown and developed and been trained deeply, they're wonderful. But are there enough of them? And they can't be everywhere at once, which is another issue. You lack. I think the capacity issue comes into play. If you had enough forces that could cover every district, then I don't think that you'd see the same issues that you have right now. So I think that comes to the head where you say, at what point will the Taliban and the Afghan National Security Forces actually really go head to head in a much greater scale? I think as of late, and this is something you don't see in the American news that I find fascinating, but you find it in the Afghan news. I can find it on Voice of America, on Al Jazeera, where the success of those security forces, those success stories are being told, but they don't make it into our news cycle. And so what the Americans see is they see the Taliban side of that equation, but they don't see how well the Afghans are actually fighting and defending their own country, which I find that dichotomy a little concerning. But it also, by not telling the full story, it portrays Afghanistan as a lost cause. And as a lost cause, why continue to invest in the country?
So last question, you work with a lot of veterans, Afghanistan war veterans. How do you see the war in Afghanistan, a success or a failure?
That's a great question, because this is an area where people are largely divided. Where you find pretty much everybody in agreement is anyone who had to work with the Afghans. I mean, they're wonderful people. Absolutely. But it kind of goes with anywhere where you actually have the opportunity to work with people from another country. You develop those bonds, you develop that loyalty. And that stays with you, especially if you stay in contact with those people. You maintain that connectivity. The difference is, where you see people who look and say, hey, look, it's time to leave. You have people that say, no, we need to stay. We need to see this through. There's still some disagreements there. And I don't think that there's enough information sharing across those two communities. I think the people who worked really closely with the Afghans understand that there's great capability there to maintain everything that they've fought for, but they still probably could use some help. And then there's those who didn't work as closely, who don't understand the whole situation, who are not convinced that it's worth continuing to invest in the future of Afghanistan. But by and large, I would say the people who worked with the Afghans absolutely love them. I mean, like I said, my experience is largely with Iraq, and I still stay in touch with the people I worked with. My interpreters, who I did everything I could to get them over here, we still talk frequently. Still friends, still stay close. I mean, I love them like family members. And I think the same thing holds true for those who worked closely with Afghans. I mean, you're just an extension of a family after a certain amount of time.